Good afternoon, good evening. This is Woodblock 2015. I'm Rob Skiff, and I'm with Ryan Craig. We've had some great sessions in the morning, and this afternoon on the East Coast, we're going to have two more. One is a discussion with Ryan Craig, and then after that is our round table. Let me first introduce Ryan Craig. He's the author of College Disrupted, The Great Unbundling of Higher Education. He's also the founding managing director of University Ventures, which is an investment company focused on the global higher education sector. Ryan leads the firm's investments in University Now and the Seed portfolio. Ryan also founded and built Wellspring, the largest and leading organization of treatment programs for overweight and obese children, adolescents, and young adults. He also headed the education and training sector at Warburg Pincus from 2001 to 2004, where he was a founding director of Bridgepoint Education, one of the largest online universities in the U.S. He's advised the Department of Education and other companies in issues critical to higher ed. He began his career as a consultant with McKinsey & Company and received his bachelor degrees in literature and economics from Yale University and his law degree from Yale Law School. He's a member of the board of directors of Claremont Lincoln University and is on the advisory board of the UCLA Extension. He's the author, like I said before, of College Disrupted, The Great Unbundling of Higher Education, which is published by Palgrave Macmillan in March of this year. So welcome to Woodblock. We really appreciate your calling in and talking with us. We have a little bit of a technical glitch with the camera, so we won't be able to see your face, but the ideas are much more important than just than video. So thanks again for coming.
I agree. Thanks, Rob. Looking forward to the conversation.
So, let's jump in and talk a little bit about College Disrupted, and let's start it off with a question. Higher education's changing, and your book argues for a very dramatic transformation in the way we think, access, and deliver education. So what event or insight did you have that made writing of this book important to you?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think probably the most fundamental, if I were to pinpoint one thing, it would be engaging with a group of entrepreneurs who came out of Yahoo and who were involved in sort of a number of technology, if you will, sort of technology pioneers in the internet space, and they began working on this notion that degrees, if you will, are the currency of the labor market, simply because we don't have a better currency. And what would a better currency be? Well, it would be a finer currency. It would be a currency that you could break down into more discrete units than a degree. So not at the course level, not at the MOOC level for sure, but at the level of the competency. If we actually could communicate one to another, namely employers, job seekers, and education providers, in the language, in the lexicon of competencies, we would go a long way to addressing, I think, many of the challenges facing higher education, and that's the notion of unbundling. If you think of a degree as a bundle of many different things, it's general education, it's your major, it's distribution requirements, it's a bundle. And what do students and job seekers actually need and want? It may not be the full bundle. It may be a few courses and an assessment. It may be a year or two. It may be a certificate. So in the same way as we've seen unbundling occur in music, or it's happening now in cable television, no longer are you going to be required to buy the full cable package of 300 channels you don't watch. You'll be able to buy the channels you want, and probably just the shows you want. So the question was, if you could create a language of competencies, likely through using technology to do so. What could the impact be on the bundle, the degree bundle, and what would that mean for the future of higher education? So that was the basic impetus. And while in the book I cover a lot of ground leading up to what I call the Great Unbundling, that is probably the focal point.
You know, it's interesting. You know, you're mentioning the Yahoo group that came together to think about this in technology and computer programming. I think in large cases that unbundling has occurred in trying to identify really good computer programmers or people who can work on projects. In some ways, it's much more valuable to look at what they've done on GitHub and their portfolio than it is to look at what degree they got or what courses they took from a particular institution. Do you agree with that? You know, how do you see, you know, in sort of the computer programming area, do you think, you know, that I think my personal opinion is that type of unbundling is well on its way to happening, where some other disciplines we definitely don't have that much movement in that case at all.
So actually, you know, this morning on that last point, there was an article that talked about the fact that both Ernst & Young and PricewaterhouseCoopers in the UK are no longer going to filter applicants to interview based on their education. They're going to filter them based on their performance in online tests. So amazing. So I tweeted this morning that as a currency, degrees are having about as good a year as the euro.
Okay.
So I think, but for sure, there's no question that technology companies are leading the way in skills-based hiring. Google has been hiring students who've completed courses in Udacity without regard to their educational background. As you say, you know, we own a company called Galvanize, which is one of the leading coding boot camps, and they have a 98% placement rate. And most of their students today still come in with degrees, so it's effectively a top-up program. But the reason employers are hiring them is not because they have a degree, but because they can see their work in GitHub and actually evaluate the code and the quality of their work. So I mean, we're big believers in that, and certainly there are, you know, some professions where seeing the work, you know, coding for sure, most technology jobs, certainly art and design work, really lend itself to kind of an e-portfolio approach. And employers, if they can evaluate the portfolio, that will dwarf the degree in terms of a hiring criteria.
Yeah, the point about being able to evaluate people's work, how they interact with others, and being able to capture that in some sort of electronic fashion is
that's right. I mean, I think
a much better, you know, a much better piece, because it allows you as a potential employer or collaborator to again figure out whether they have the skills.
Right. I mean, make no mistake here. We're not talking about employers literally hiring someone because they see their work. What we're talking about is the filtering function, right? So to date, technology has actually made hiring more challenging, more complex for employers than easier. And the reason for that is that for every job opening, they get hundreds of applications submitted online that are very difficult to distinguish one from another. Most applicants will have similar education, similar qualifications, and the way they're actually filtering right now, large employers will have application tracking systems that will filter those applications, and they're filtering them based on keywords mapped to the job description, right? So in the book, I talk about this phenomenon of resume spam, where you have applicants who literally will be copying the job description in white font into their resume or their cover letter so that you get past the application tracking system filter. And that's not a very good filter. What it means is that as the employer is selecting which 10 or 20 candidates they actually want to interview, they're going to end up with probably 20 false negatives, so they'll be excluding 20 people. from the set who actually are qualified, and of the 20 they select, they'll probably have 10 or 15 false positives. So the likelihood that you're going to hire the wrong candidate or an unqualified candidate is actually pretty high. So what we're talking about here is the filtering function, where employers, on the basis of using what I call competency marketplaces or e-portfolios, are evaluating the work, but not doing it themselves, right? Employers are never going to actually get to the level of looking at the work that some candidate has. What they're going to use, they're going to rely on algorithms and intelligent systems to filter those competencies and those portfolios for them, identify what competencies are demonstrated as a result, and then select from that filtered set.
So you really see the premium of the degrees and the named institutions, and people sort of climbing that, going to the most prestigious school as possible. While that may be important from a social capital, social networking piece, that in terms of the value of those degrees to the employers is becoming less and less valuable, less an indicator of excellence, because you hit upon that point in College Disrupted a couple of different ways, and it was really great to to read those chapters where you're really delving deeply into the notion of, well, how do you evaluate a degree? What does a degree really mean? How did it serve a social function, a social sorting function?
Yep.
And how much, as a person who started a private school, who's taught at the K through 12 and then into college, sometimes it's very difficult to evaluate, well, how much did I teach the student and how much did I just get out of the way of the student learning?
That is there's a lot what bound up in what you just said. Keep in mind that when American colleges and universities started, they really did start almost exactly as a social selection function, right? It was for the wealthy merchants of the American colonies to send their children, so their children could essentially be distinguished in society as leaders, right? Educating leaders. And in the 20th century, our system of higher education became a democratic system for the entire population, and a merit-based system. The challenge is that 46% of students who attempt to attempt degree programs don't complete them at this point. So we really have a one-size-fits-all system at this point. It's what I call isomorphism, right? Everyone is trying to emulate the excellent institutions, and we know what excellence is. Excellence is the Ivy League plus Stanford plus MIT and so forth. But that doesn't mean that that's the optimal way to provide post-secondary education for an entire population of 320 million people, let alone a global population of 7 billion people. We're very enthusiastic about a multiplicity of different credentials and post-secondary education opportunities. The challenge is that that vision tends to yield if you will, sort of an alphabet soup of badges and certificates, where it's sort of what does that mean? I mean, I think you'd be hard pressed to find a lot of people who truly understand the different badging and certification in the IT sector, which is sort of the most advanced in terms of .NET and Cisco certified and so forth like that. It is complex and so forth. We believe that that will be sorted by competency marketplaces that will emerge, where algorithms will be able to extract and parse competencies from your resumes, from your transcripts, match them with the competencies that are required by job descriptions, and really provide a much more effective filtering system than we have today. I do want to speak to your question about what does this mean about the value of degrees and the appeal of our top universities. I don't think that Stanford is at any risk of having empty seats anytime soon, or for the next couple hundred years, quite frankly, simply because employers value those outputs, those graduates highly, without really questioning why. I mean, the answer is almost certainly because the caliber of the inputs are so high. That of course the caliber of the outputs are high, and that doesn't really speak to the exact value that's been added by the institution. But I think that the top institutions will continue to have lines out the door for decades ahead. The question is not the top 5%, but the other 95%, and those institutions that are not elite institutions, and what happens when an employer has to choose between hiring a candidate who has a degree from a non-elite institution versus a candidate who's almost a perfect match on competencies according to LinkedIn, right? And the employers will make different decisions, and they'll probably, maybe they'll hire both candidates, and they'll track that non-elite university bachelor's degree graduate, and then track the LinkedIn graduate and see who performs better. And if the LinkedIn graduate essentially performs better in the job, gets promoted, and so forth, has a better career trajectory, then presumably the employer is going to continue to modify that job description so they get more of those LinkedIn candidates and fewer degree candidates. And at that point, I think that's really what triggers what I call the great unbundling, where the signal from degrees becomes, if you will, is a lower signal than the signal that employers begin to get from these competency marketplaces, right? Those signals that they're getting from competency marketplaces will be, higher amplitude, higher fidelity, and employers will begin to respond to those signals, hire more of those students. And so, that's where I end in the book. I say I think we are probably headed to a two-tier system of higher education, with sort of the elite of 4-year residential degree programs for a small minority, and a much more efficient, affordable system, which will consist of probably blended delivery for most, for everyone else. And I think we get to the point where, as I say, in 30 years, 50 years, you might look on someone who's actually earning a degree, even at the most elite institution, in the same way as you look on today. If you have a friend whose daughter has just come out as a debutante, right? What do
yeah,
you?
That's the analogies that you're making, towards that debutante / finishing school are, I think right on the money. It's that 75% in the middle. Like you said, the 2 or 3 billion people who want access to better education. We're not going to be able to reproduce the elite, small, liberal arts, residential living community for those numbers. And so we have to come up with some solution that helps to maximize human potential within the constraints of the resources that we have to deal with. And,
well, it's not just simply a resource issue, right? It's a fact we are trying to do that right now for 20 million students in the U.S., and almost half of them aren't succeeding. So we have to keep that in mind. When Arne Duncan, Secretary of Education, says he's not overly concerned about the fact that students are graduating with bachelor's degrees with $30,000 in debt, I agree with him. I think that's absolutely right. The bigger concern, much bigger concern, are the students who are graduating, who are not completing with $10,000, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 in debt. That's the problem, because they get nothing for that. It's not valued in the market. In an unbundled world, if you've taken 2 years, 60 credits, you won't have a degree, but the competencies that you've gained will be measured and valued in the market. So unbundling is good for pretty much everyone, except for perhaps the universities that don't begin to change.
So if you're a student today with good grades and a work ethic, what kinds of factors should you be thinking about when you're choosing a higher education institution? Are you talking about reputation of the institution, cost? You said, you mentioned a little bit about the amount of debt they pay for the education.
Right.
The quality of the instruction. You're a junior or senior in high school. Where would you start looking? How would you start to assemble your education, given what the environment is like today?
Yeah, so I think, again, I cannot predict the timing of this. I think, unbundling, we'll probably see the start of it in 5 years, a decade from now, I think we'll be well into it, but I think that it would be foolish to tell a high school student today that a degree doesn't matter. I think that's sort of where Peter Thiel comes out, and I disagree with him. I think it matters for the foreseeable future, at least. And certainly brands matter. If you can get into a top, a brand name institution, that will have high value for you, well beyond the academic program. Obviously, it's been documented. I think beyond that, if you're choosing from amongst sort of non-elite, non-brand name institutions, the most important element of your choice is actually what you major in. If you can major in STEM-oriented subject matter, you're much more likely to be employed at a good salary starting out, which is really the key step. You get that first job. That's key to having a successful professional career, not ending up as a Starbucks barista for the next 6 or 7 years. So I would say that's really what you ought to be looking for. I think that in a couple of years we'll be in a place where what I call these just-in-time providers, like these coding boot camps, really become viable alternatives to a degree program for 18, 19-year-old students, and they'll be able to go and take a course or two for 3 to 6 months and go right into a job. And I think it's not just technology. I think we'll see other sectors emerge with just-in-time options, probably in healthcare, maybe even financial services, energy. It's a model where for sure you're not getting the broad liberal arts distribution requirements taken care of, and it's hard to argue that students are going to be as well off in terms of those core cognitive functions, critical thinking, and so forth, that are so predictive of career performance. But it is hard to argue that you need to get all that done in a 2 to 4 year stretch from between the ages of 18 to 22, right? Why can't you take a 3-month experience, go work for a year, come back, do another 3-month course, maybe even value the experience to a greater degree than you would if you were just going straight through. So I think that sort of just-in-time model, or sort of lifetime learning model. It is that sort of, a lot of people in higher education have been focused on how do we get there. Well, I think we get there, but unfortunately, I think we get there at the expense of the 4-year degree between the ages of 18 to 22 for most students.
So Oplerno is a startup. We're in the educational sphere, working to gain traction. So if so what strategies and what sort of growth areas do you think there are for startups to deal with this disruption that is, what you say that it's about 5 to 10 years out? What would you get involved in? Where do you see the opportunity?
Sure. I mean, so for example, we think that one hallmark or way station towards unbundling is what we call the double-click degree, right? So today, the transcript is largely ignored, both in the education process and the hiring process, right? I know one large employer has said that they only actually refer to the transcript in the hiring process as a honesty test. They'll ask questions about it to make sure that the student actually is being honest about the transcript, but has nothing to do with actually what they've learned or trying to measure what they've learned or what their competencies are. So it's a fairly opaque device right now. But there are schools like Elon and Stanford that are trying to develop a transcript that's actually dynamic and meaningful for employers. We call it a double-click degree, where you can literally double-click on a course, and based on the level of achievement the student exhibited in that course, ascertain what competencies that student has obtained and should be able to demonstrate. So that is something that universities can do themselves, but I think more likely they'll do with partner entities, we're looking at a number of companies that try and get at that in different ways, from an e-portfolio standpoint, from a curriculum management standpoint. I think that's interesting. I think that companies that try to bridge the gap between higher education and the labor market are extremely interesting. We just made a small investment in a company called ProSky, which provides 10-week-long, wholly online courses in specific skills-based areas like digital marketing, SEO, sales, to students while they're still in college. Students are doing these courses. The curriculum, are projects that are provided by employers that are on the other end looking at the student work, looking at the students working together in teams, and are hiring students right out of those courses. They have about a 50% placement rate after a 10-week online course. So talk about a great capstone, if you will. Talk about sort of the last mile to employment. Colleges and universities are much more useful than your traditional career services or placement center that colleges and universities operate. But they're not going to do that themselves. There are even staffing companies, traditional staffing companies that are getting into the business of reaching out into colleges and universities, doing some training, just like the type I described, of college and university students while they're still in college, having them graduate, have them come to sort of a boot camp type thing, and then placing them in companies. So those businesses we think are interesting. The gap that has existed from time immemorial between higher education and the labor market is closing up. It's closing up because we have the data. If you think about it, it's really a data problem. What do employers need? What should education providers be delivering? That data is increasingly available, and I think is likely. I think the big winners are not going to be universities. They're not going to be employers, but they're going to be intermediaries that emerge to help bridge that gap.
So, one of the largest movements that has happened in the last 5 years is sort of the MOOC movement. And, why do you think the MOOC movement failed in some ways? And what do you think the long-term prospects are for companies based on the model? Basically, they're sort of companies that are providing content to colleges and universities in terms of for their education.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just on that last point, higher education tends to operate on, the principle that if we didn't create, if we didn't create it, or more likely if I didn't create it, it's not worth appropriating. And so there are very few examples of content providers to universities that are successful in having universities sort of adopt a curriculum wholesale. Universities are much more fond of, if you will, recreating the wheel, yep. Reinventing the wheel, and they do. I think that was certainly one element of some of the MOOC companies' business plans. The hoping that other smaller non-elite colleges would adopt these courses. I think they've since come off of that. What they're now hoping to do is put the courses together in some sort of sequence that becomes meaningful for prospective employees and employers. But just to back up 1 second, I mean, we were the first public skeptic of MOOCs when they came out in February of 2012. We said, we've seen this movie before, we know how it ends. I wish I lived in a world where people were willing to pay for lifelong learning, but I don't think I live in that world. Unfortunately, people enroll in post-secondary education because they expect some sort of economic return from it. And sure enough, 3 years later, MOOCs, traffic is stalled or declining. 80% of students already have degrees. Completion rates are 5 to 10%. Of course, it depends how you measure them. If you measure them based on who turns in the first assignment, they're much higher. But there doesn't seem to be much of a market for the courses themselves. So, the MOOC providers are trying to string them together into credentials that should have meaning in the market. But of course, it's hard to invent a new credential, right?
Yep.
Our employers really can invent.
Sorry, yeah. Culturally, it's next to impossible.
Yeah.
you really have to integrate yourself within, the current, social cultural capital configuration.
Yeah, that's right. So, a pathway from Coursera or a nano degree from Udacity, uh, you know, uh, y- I think that's just very challenging. That's and so
It
our
also,
answer is that
yeah.
that happens when unbundling happens, right? So when employers are able to rely on a signal from a third party, like a LinkedIn competency marketplace, that someone who takes a Udacity nano degree actually has the competencies that they're looking for as provided for in their job description, then you'll make it into the filtered set and you'll be interviewed, right? Otherwise, you won't be because they're not going to know what to make of it. So I think it's a bit of a fool's errand, frankly, and we'll see how it turns out.
Now, MOOCs were targeted also a lot on the outside the U.S. market. Thinking that that was a great way to get students and from outside the United States and outside of Europe, creating a more level playing field. And in your book, in the chapter "America's Next Great Export," you talked about the potential of U.S. higher learning as a economic engine in this country. Can you just talk a little bit about that idea? Why do you think in a system that people describe as being so screwed up domestically, why do you think that our educational networks could drive an export market?
Sure. So as Churchill famously said, democracy is the worst form of government except for all the other kinds. So, certainly we've been in this conversation and in the book, I've been quite critical of our system of higher education, but it should be said that it's, the worst except for all the other kinds, which are worse. So I think that, on the whole, we have our system is viewed as, the top system of higher education in the world. And I think it's not just because of the top, 50 or 100 institutions, which, dominate the global rankings. But it is because we do attempt, unlike any other country, to serve a very broad swath of the population. You have students here who participate in post-secondary education who, in almost any other country, wouldn't have access to higher education. So that is a very good thing. Over the next decade or so, we're going to have about 100 million additional enrollees in colleges and universities around the world. And there just isn't the capacity in those emerging markets to handle those students. And even if there were, there's such a thirst to attend, elite or quasi-elite brand name institutions. And in the U.S., I would classify almost any university that has the name of a state as a quasi-elite institution, because it would be recognized globally as an American university, right? So that's viewed very positively. They're just there's just going to be a huge shortfall in terms of places, and so we're already seeing the U.S. today is of our 22 million enrolled students in higher education, only about 4% come from outside the U.S. That compares with about 20% in the U.K. and even higher in Australia. And of course, Australia's international education business is driven on the basis of its proximity to those large markets in Asia. Today the model is literally you import the students, right? Australia imports the students. The UK imports the students. Hundreds of thousands of them a year. It's a huge business. In Australia right now, it's 1% of their GDP is driven by serving international students. So, fast forward to 10 years from now, if we can figure out how to use technology to serve and attract international students, and I think that's not going to be entirely online delivered. I think it'll be a blended solution in almost every case, because in emerging markets, online degree programs are viewed as synonymous with traditional correspondence or distance education courses, which connote low quality and therefore only command a very low price point. So it's very difficult to reach them with a wholly online model. But with a blended model, and with blended models that are sort of purpose-built for those markets. So it's not just simply a matter of taking your MBA and making it a blended program and putting it into China or India. It's probably redeveloping the curriculum to make it relevant and probably doing it in conjunction with a local university there and maybe a dual degree program, something like that. But if you can figure that out, if we could reach 1% of GDP with our, if you will, international higher education business, that's about 7 times what we currently do in international higher education. It would be $170 billion opportunity for us. It would make higher education America's largest export business. So it's a huge economic opportunity, and it's one that we just actually wrote a piece in Forbes where we talk about the fact that Australia and Canada they actually have a sort of national strategy for how to approach this. The U.S. not only doesn't have a strategy, by requiring, a couple of years ago, the Obama administration required state authorization, which meant that we took a national market in online education and effectively balkanized it. So any provider hoping to offer online degree programs now has to get approval effectively in 50 states, although with SARA, that's now ameliorated to some extent. But so not only do we not have a strategy, we're actually being counterproductive in that regard. It's important, I think, economically and strategically for the U.S. to recognize this is a huge opportunity for our colleges and universities, and in particular, as we face unbundling, which is going to be incredibly disruptive to so many institutions. Being able to enroll thousands or tens of thousands of international students in our existing degree programs will provide a cushion for many institutions to make that transition to an unbundled future. And so we are being short-sighted and not paying, I think, sufficient attention to the international opportunity.
Now, you in your description, you're saying U.S. national strategy, but in terms of there are people all over the world with expertise in all kinds of subjects who are also great teachers. So, do you see does this sort of export opportunity need to be centered around U.S. institutions, or do you see the creation of some sort of transnational organizations or transnational corporations that will be able to do this better?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think as long as we have a bundle, it's going to matter where you get the bundle from, right? And so if you can get the bundle from a brand name U.S. university or a university that even has the name of an American state, like Southern New Hampshire University, one reason they've done so well, people think it's a state institution, which around the rest of the world, by the way, the elite institutions are all state, right, institutions.
Sure. Yep.
So I think that's the focus for sure. Students are going to be drawn to institutions they know. It's interesting. One of the most successful transnational education stories in the UK is the University of Manchester, right? And you'd say, well, why is that? Well, Manchester United and Manchester City are 2 of the most recognized global football clubs in Asia, and so Manchester just has a huge advantage in that, and I don't think many U.S. universities are thinking about that right now.
So you would recommend for a startup like Oplerno to be partnering with, in terms of if it wants to go into the overseas, outside the U.S. markets, you'd say, hey, partner up with some state universities or state colleges. That's going to be a much better, that's going to attract much more interest than if you go with some private colleges, etc.
Yeah, unless there's a recognizable brand, for sure. I definitely think that. And today, keep in mind, the model is very much still an import-to-student model, right? So we're seeing huge growth amongst pathway providers, if you're familiar with that term. These are companies that partner with universities and source the students from the agent, and then operate a parallel program, often on the university's campus, which combines English language training and probably some general academic preparedness, maybe some sort of acculturation to the American university system and living in the U.S. And then after 6 to 12 months, the students are guaranteed progression to the university's program. Universities like these programs because it means that they know they're getting students who actually are not only capable of the English, college-level English, but capable of doing college-level work.
Now, you pointed out that 100, for the last question before we stop, you pointed out that 100 million market of the emerging middle class globally, of more people who want higher ed. What's the capacity that we have to scale this up right now, to scale this kind of movement up? Because I don't, to integrate those numbers into the traditional system, and it's critical that we do, because I don't know, I think that out there is a lot of wasted talent that could be deployed to solve all kinds of problems, create new markets, new businesses,
sure,
et cetera, et cetera. What do you think how long do you think it's going to take us to get this scaled up? Or
well,
is that
again,
outside the realm of, I
no.
mean, that's a tough question to ask.
No, I mean, I think the answer is that it's through technology. And certainly, I mean, we're investors in one institution, which is online. It's called Patton University, online, self-paced, competency-based, where literally there's no barriers to scaling. It's almost as easy to run the institution with 100,000 students as it is with 1,000 students. Now, I don't think that those kinds of programs are going to be appealing in emerging markets anytime soon. But you can combine those kinds of online experiences with, whether it's 60-40 online on ground or 80-20 online on ground, and if you can partner with local institutions or enterprises to do the on-ground delivery, you have a very scalable model. So again, it's certainly not an elite, U.S. residential college experience, but it's probably better than the alternative that those students have in their local markets today.
Well, thank you very much for your time, Ryan Craig, and please, everybody who's watching or will watch this on YouTube, go out and, especially if you're a college administrator or faculty, go out and let's see if we can capture this. Go out and get a copy of the book. It is a page turner. I sat down and started reading it, and I'm not lying when I say I couldn't put it down, and I read it in about 8 hours. It was great, and it's filled with all kinds of notes and filled with all kinds of tips and ways in which to think about the transformation in higher ed, which is going to affect all of us, whether we're in academia or whether we're in business or whether we're in our communities. And thank you again, Ryan Craig, for coming to Woodblock, and hope to see you again.
Thanks very much, Rob. Enjoyed it.
Take care. Bye. So we've got a session, our final one will be in 15 minutes. So check us out at the next link, and we'll talk with you later.